Kelly.
Hi, Irma.
Hi, Kelly. I could see the screen.
Excellent. And it looks like we have, well, there's 8 people with us so far, so we will get started in just a minute, right, Irma?
Yes, just a second. Oh, but I'd like to say hello to those that are on the call. So there is, hi, Doreen. I don't know, Doreen. Kelly, are you going to instruct people to get off of mute? Are you going to keep them on mute? How are you going to run the meeting?
Well, Irma, that's completely up to you. What would you like?
Well, I think I'd like to open up the meeting, and then if we have
Sure,
minutes, we can mute people. So you have the power to do that, Kelly?
I do. So, everyone, I'm going to unmute your line right now, and that means that if you are in a place where you have a lot of background noise or if you're doing something that you don't want us to hear, then you can very quickly mute yourself again, but otherwise you'll be able to say hello and we'll be able to begin the call with a little verbal interaction.
Okay, so Doreen oh, they're all dropping off. Oh, there's Doreen.
There we go. Right, so you won't see them under attendees now,
Mhm.
but they will be back in a moment.
Okay. So this is Zoom, and if you prefer not to be visual, in the lower, as you put your computer, and I don't know how it works with an iPad, you can actually stop the video. So I'm going to do that right now to show you what that looks like. So I have stopped my video, but I'm still speaking. So if that's a preference if you want to do that.
Yeah, and my video I might have to reconnect. So we might not get my video. Sorry everyone. I'm sure you want to check me out right now. My video's not working. So,
Why?
well, I'm using a little external camera
Yeah.
that is a little finicky.
Okay. So Trudy is here, and Kathy is here from Michigan. Roberta is here from Connecticut. Peggy from New Jersey. Doreen from Doreen Worldly. She's global. She's now in Florida. I am expecting Maureen, and I don't know what's going on, so I'm just going to text her to see if she can get into the call.
Okay.
Janice was going to be on the call as well.
And Irma, we do have 2 people that are in on the phone only.
Oh, okay. So that's probably Maureen.
We won't actually, I don't get to see the numbers, so I can't verify for you, but yeah, we do have 2 that are in just on the phone.
All right, and I'm noticing that your presentation has all the slides on the side that everybody's seeing.
Yes, and I'm going to expand that out.
Total bummer that they can't see you.
Well, yeah, I can take off my external camera, but it'll probably be dark.
Dark?
Yeah, because she'll be just getting my laptop camera. We can try it. Hang on. And I've got a headset on, so. There it is. Hey, everybody.
Hi.
I'm not. Oh, there you are. Okay.
I'm a little dark, though, right? It's a little dark.
Not
I
bad.
usually use a different camera, which is great, but it's just if you don't have it plugged in into the port before you start Zoom, it doesn't know you want it to work. So
Okay. And how is my sound, everybody? Is it okay, or should I put on my headset? So I see Doreen.
Fine for me.
Okay, that's Kathy. Okay, Doreen, is it good? Let me take Doreen off. I can't take Doreen off of mute. Okay. Good. Nobody can see me. Okay. All right. So, shall we begin? And I will do my introduction as you bring the screen live.
Sure.
Yeah, 706. And I want to reduce this, minimize this. Okay. Hi, everybody. This is a new technology. Roberta is very familiar with this technology. Doreen probably is as well, but I'm really happy and thrilled to be presenting my dear friend and colleague, Kelly Lang. So let me tell you a little bit about Kelly. Kelly is a graduate from the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. She graduated in 2007, but before she went to school, she was challenged by a diagnosis that was handed about her son, Thomas. Thomas was diagnosed in the first grade with ADD, OCD, and Tourette. So prior to going to school, she was handed this diagnosis and a bag full of medicine, pills.
Mm-hmm.
And that started her on her journey of diving deeply into the whole addictive quality about sugar, about food sensitivities, and the rest we will let Kelly tell you about where he is at this point. But what particularly intrigued her is the whole aspect of the brain sugar, or the brain chemistry on sugar. Now, before we start, when I first went to the Institute of Integrative Nutrition in 2003, the founder, Joshua Rosenthal, came on stage and said, "Listen up, everybody. I want you to know that sugar is as addictive as heroin." I was like, "What? I don't think so." He said, "No, no, you probably won't believe me, but sugar is as addictive as heroin." So fast forward to probably a decade later. Can they see me in my book?
Yes.
Okay. So I went to a lecture by this woman whose name is Nicole Avena. She's a PhD at Princeton. And she wrote this book, Why Diets Fail. Science explains how to end cravings, lose weight, and get healthy. But what she has here in this thing, it says, because you're addicted to sugar. And she said, I have to tell you that sugar is as addictive to heroin. So, it took 10 years, and maybe I wanted to believe it from a different source, which really was my own source, because I know what happens to me when I'm on sugar. In fact, right before the call, I said to Kelly, I'm having a sugar dip because I was running around. I was a little nervous about systems. And I went downstairs and got some nuts so I could have some protein and fat. So Kelly has also worked with a couple of naturopaths. She's up in New Hampshire, and she does food sensitivity tests and has run food sensitivity tests on 1,100 clients. Just a small piece of her knowledge. So she's not only started out on her own with her son and for herself, but now has expanded to her client base, and now is lucky to have her present today here on the problem with sugar. So we're going to take calls at the end. Some of you, if you're on the computer, can use your cursor, and you see at the bottom of the panel, there's a chat box. And in that chat box, you can actually ask questions. You could type out your questions, or we'll turn everybody on live at the end to take questions. So this call, actually, I see Trudy's name on here. This call originated so long ago when Trudy was talking about sugar and her relationship to sugar, which really does match mine. I have portion controls with sugar. I have all the addictive qualities of sugar. So, oops, need to turn that off. So that's me. And Trudy, thank you for bringing this moment forward, because it was because of you that we're here. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Trudy. So I'm going to stop talking.
Thank you, Irma. That was wonderful. And thanks for everyone for being here. I'm excited to share this with you. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and one that I think more and more of us need to share with others and talk about. And I hope tonight that you'll be inspired not only to look at things in your own life, but maybe to make a difference in someone else's. So I'm going to skip past my little intro about myself, because Irma did a great job, and I never like really talking about myself anyway, so thanks, Irma, for that. And let's really just start with examining in this moment right now what your relationship with sugar is like. So obviously, if you're here tonight, there was something about that word, something about sugar that drew you. to want to learn more, to want to explore a little bit, and maybe to get a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of support about making some helpful or beneficial changes. But first, just take stock of what your relationship with sugar is like. And, Irma shared hers. And it's really powerful to just really be honest with yourself and connect with whether sugar feels like a problem for you. Is it something that has that addictive quality in your life? And to really look at what sugar means to you. So sugar, we're talking, for many of us, we're thinking that white stuff that we put in coffee and tea, but sugar comes in many different forms, right? So we know that white flour products, we know that baked goods, we know that even pasta, we know that, anything that's made that turns quickly to sugar in the body can have the same impact on our health. So just think about your overall relationship with sugar in that context and how it's working for you. All right, and as you're thinking about that, I'll share a little bit of my story just to help you understand that I can relate. All right, so I grew up, and I always tell this, right, Irma? I'm the youngest of 8, and I grew up in New York, and I was a very skinny child. I was the youngest. I don't know, maybe there just wasn't enough left in the gene makeup or something, but I was very, very thin. And so I could eat whatever I wanted. And in fact, my mother encouraged me to have extra dessert or extra anything in the hopes that I would actually gain weight. So I grew up with the mindset that I could eat anything and it would have no effect on my body. And I did eat healthy at home. We had healthy meals, but I ate lots of candy and chocolate bars and desserts anywhere and everywhere that I could. It wasn't until college that I started to actually gain weight. And then, it was this shocking realization that I couldn't just eat whatever I wanted anymore. And that was the 80s. And in the 80s, if you remember, that was the whole low-fat craze. And so everything that was created to be low-fat was very, very high in sugar. So now I was watching my weight, so I was trying to eat low-fat food, but inherently I was actually getting more sugar as a result. And I soon became very addicted to sugar. And that continued for quite a long time. And I had all sorts of issues with my blood sugar. I had issues with my mood, with my energy levels, recurrent health issues, recurrent infections, immune system problems. And really, now that I look back at all of it, I can recognize it had so much to do with the amount of sugar that I was eating. So long story short, I ended up with candida in my 30s, which if any of you have had that, I don't wish it on anyone, not my worst enemy. And in the treatment of that condition, it's recommended that you take all sugar out of the diet in all forms. And so I did. I was that desperate to be healed of it. And I went cold turkey and I white knuckled my way through not having any carbs or any sugar for 2 years. And it was without a doubt the worst 2 years of my life. But I did it. White knuckling it and being extremely driven to reduce and get rid of my symptoms, I got off of sugar. But the first time that I had stress, significant stress in my life, the death of a family member, I was right back at it. So I then learned about an entirely different approach to changing my relationship with sugar. And that's what I'm going to be sharing with all of you tonight, in the hopes that if this resonates with you, you have a path or a process that you can follow that actually works. And it's been over 10 years now, and I don't have to white knuckle it anymore around sugar. Sugar's just not part of my life anymore. It's not a craving, it's not a desire. And I would actually tell you that I have my freedom from sugar. So I wish that for everyone, and that's why I'm here tonight. So let's first cover, just in case there's any question about it, what's so bad about sugar? Now, if you don't have any health issues, you might be thinking, well, I don't have diabetes, I don't have a weight issue, I don't have decaying teeth, So you might be thinking maybe sugar's not so terrible. But I'm going to point out a couple of things, some that will really resonate with you. In fact, the first one should really resonate with you in terms of your bone health. And being part of Irma's tribe, hopefully that would be enough of a reason for you. But sugar is very acidic. And as you probably know, anything that is acidic will cause the body to leach calcium from the bones, right? And so that's a problem for your bone health, eating sugar, having sugar in the diet. Sugar also takes away from your body's enzyme stores. So when we ingest sugar, it doesn't come to us with any enzymes, all right? Enzymes are what we need to break down food. And lots of the foods that we eat, especially raw foods, will come with some enzymes. And that's really helpful to our body because we don't make all of the enzymes that we need. Sugar is the opposite of that. It comes with nothing. And so we have to take enzymes that we have produced and stored and use them to break down that sugar. So it's actually depleting us. It's not just that it's a zero benefit, it's actually depleting us. All right, and there is no nutritional benefit to sugar. There's no advantage to sugar. We can talk glucose and talk about the needs for glucose. We don't need sugar to get what we need in terms of glucose. All right, there's plenty of other ways to get it. Sugar, as you know already, can also lead to diabetes, obesity, tooth decay. We could trace it to heart and cardiovascular illnesses and lots of other things. Sugar feeds cancer. If you don't know anything about that, do some research on it. There's really powerful information about that. And that ties in even with the part of the fact that the sugar is acidic, so an acidic environment is much more suitable for cancer as well. So not only does sugar feed cancer cells, but it again promotes that acidic environment which cancer thrives in. All right, and what we're going to be talking about most tonight with regard to sugar is the fact that it has the same defining characteristics of any addictive substance. All right, and two of those characteristics are that when you come off of sugar, you have withdrawal, right? So when you take the food or the substance away, you have withdrawal symptoms. And the other is that it creates a priming effect in the brain. And what that means is that the same amount of sugar today will not have the same effect on you tomorrow. Right? So same thing with drugs, with alcohol. We continually need more and more and more of the substance to get the same feeling, to get that same high. All right? So being aware of that sugar has those same defining qualities of addictive substances. So how do you know if you have a problem with sugar, right? That's the million-dollar question tonight. So besides the obvious and measurable health conditions that we talked about, there are a couple of ways to identify if sugar is an issue for you, if it's not just a normal kind of average relationship with sugar. The first thing to look at is that inability to just have one. So if you're the kind of person that can take a bite out of a chocolate chip cookie and put it down on a plate and walk away and forget that it's there, that to me is the sign of someone who doesn't have a big problem with sugar. Most of us who have a problem with sugar would be thinking about that chocolate chip cookie the entire time we were away from it, right? It would draw us back. We would say, oh, I still have that cookie to finish, right? In fact, we probably wouldn't leave the room until we had finished that cookie. Right, so that inability to have just one or to stop at one is one indication that you might have a problem with sugar. The other, not quite as tangible, but if you know you have a preoccupation with dessert, with carbohydrates in general, with wine, if these are things you think about throughout the day, even when you're not hungry, if you look forward to when you're going to have that next reward food, that's another sign that you have a problem with sugar. All right. I like to actually point out the fact that a history of unmet health goals due to an inability to stay off sugar or carbs or wine or other forms of sugar, that to me is a sign that you have a problem with sugar. So when I work with someone and they tell me they've been trying to reach a health goal for 20 years, but they always self-sabotage, that's a signal to me that there's something else going on there. If this is something they truly desire for their body, for their health, and they just can't make it happen because they feel powerless around certain foods, that's a sign that there's a problem with sugar. All right. Two of the other pretty obvious signs are if you have changes in your behavior or your mood when you don't have it. So if you normally have, whether it's a glass of wine or dessert or something, chocolate, and you don't have it on a particular day, if you get cranky, if you get moody, if you're irritable, and you won't necessarily trace it to that, but that's a sign, all right, that you have a problem with sugar. And on the flip side of that, when you do have sugar, if you get a really high high from it, if you feel really good, and then you have a strong letdown or a low, that's another sign that sugar is a problem for you. All right, so hang on to that. Let that resonate a little bit. We're going to talk more. We're going to get into more detail to help you find a little bit more clarity. The key is knowing that it's not as easy as just saying no. So that first time around with me trying to get rid of sugar and white knuckling it was not the right approach. Just saying no can work for a little bit, can work for time. And if you're really fed up with symptoms, it could work, as in my case, for as long as 2 years. But it's not going to work or last for your lifetime. All right, and certainly not without residual negative effects on your psyche and your emotional state. So let me take you through a little bit of what we do know. The first piece is about serotonin. So if you're not familiar with serotonin, here's kind of the definition. All right, it's the brain chemical that determines your mood, your sense of satiation or being satisfied, and it's the brain chemical that puts the brakes on. So I call it the just say no brain chemical. The problem is that some people are born with much lower levels of serotonin. All right, and one example of that we've seen and proven is in children of alcoholics. So when they do brain scans, when they analyze the brains of alcoholics, they can actually see that there are more serotonin receptors. They've actually tested and recognized that the brains of alcoholics have a different configuration than the brains of other people, right? And that brain chemistry can be inherited. It can be passed down. All right, so that means that you can inherit lower levels of brain chemistry that predisposes you to having lower levels of serotonin, that brain chemical that makes you just feel like everything's okay, the brain chemical that puts the brakes on, and the brain chemical that helps you to say no, right, to just feel like life is good. All right. That brain chemistry, that lower serotonin, makes it much harder to feel good and harder to avoid sugar. Right? And as Kathleen DeMason, who is somebody that I follow and have learned from over the years, she's actually a pioneer in addictive nutrition. She shares that sugar acts like a drug in those who are sugar sensitive because it causes a temporary and short-lived release of serotonin. It makes them feel good, but only for a short time. And this brain chemistry she refers to as a sugar-sensitive brain. All right, so when you have low serotonin, when you have more serotonin receptors, and sugar fits into those receptor sites, what happens is you crave sugar because you want that release of serotonin. You want to feel good. The problem is when it's sugar that's doing that job, it's very temporary. All right, and the next time you're going to actually need more sugar to get that same release, that same feeling. All right, so that's that priming effect that I talked about. So the people that are born with that brain chemistry will be more susceptible to sugar addiction and depression. So again, serotonin's the brain chemical that is responsible for feeling good. So if you have low serotonin, you're more apt to have depression or anxiety. Seasonal affective disorder is often common. You're also more likely to be addicted to sugar, all right, because you don't have that impulse control. You don't have those breaks, all right? And those cravings for carbs and sugar are much more intensified when you have low serotonin. So is this you? Is this something that is going on in your body, in your brain chemistry? Well, here are a couple of early warning signs of the sugar-sensitive brain chemistry, and you can kind of just judge whether this might be at play for you or maybe for someone else in your life, all right, someone that you care about. So one sign is being irritable or disruptive when meals are not consistent. All right, so in the case of my son Thomas, who definitely had this brain chemistry, he would have a problem in school right before lunchtime. Right? And the teacher would call it, we figured it out because she called me and said, he's really horrible. He's really disruptive during reading time. And I said, well, when is reading time? And she said, oh, it's right before lunch. And so what happened was we needed to just interject some food right during that reading time for him because he couldn't make it as long as the other kids could make it, right? Being hyper or high after having sugar or carbs, again, followed by that low, that depression or that feeling of lethargy, that's another sign or an early warning sign. Again, we can look at this all the way back to childhood. So those kids, like my kids, all of them were like crazy people on sugar. They literally, it was like, someone had like wound them up with, 20,000 volts of energy and they would just be nuts. And that's how my kids were on sugar. Other kids could have a cupcake at the birthday party and, not be climbing the walls, but not my kids. So we can see this at younger ages in how reactive kids are to sugar. And then that low, so the crash, the anger, the outbursts, the depression, the exhaustion, the the no motivation, right? Also, that constant craving for sugar and carbs. So we'll see that even at young ages. We'll see the kids will be constantly craving. They won't want to eat other foods. They'll only want to eat carbs and sugar. All right. Low pain tolerance, being easily upset or emotional. So this has to do with beta endorphins. So often, well, almost always with people that have low serotonin, that have that brain, that sugar sensitive brain, they also have low beta endorphins. So physical pain and emotional pain is much more significant to them and it's much harder for them to bear. So again, another reason that they'll often turn to food for comfort, for pleasure, for reward to make them feel better. And then depression. So these are, we'll call it an early warning sign because some people might have depression, in their younger years, in their teens, and they might not make the connection between this brain chemistry. But depression, seasonal affective disorder, ADD, ADHD, those can all be signs of that sugar-sensitive brain. So the good news, is everybody ready for some good news? Because this is a little overwhelming, right? The good news is that we can heal and change our biochemistry with food. All right, we can actually create a different relationship with sugar, and it doesn't have to be white knuckling it. All right, it doesn't have to be that stressful, always, feeling controlled about what you can eat. It can be a really beautiful, healthy relationship with sugar. Right, and I've done this, I've been there. I'm going to take you through the process and then I'm happy to share about any questions. I've also helped many people through this process, so I know that it works. Kathleen DeMason, actually, who I referenced, she has her PhD in addictive nutrition, has helped hundreds of thousands of people with healing their brain chemistry. And she's worked with people, she started really as a drug and alcohol rehab counselor many years ago. She did that for 20 or 30 years. And then she recognized this interesting pattern in the people that were doing really well in recovery. And what she recognized was that they were all eating a certain way, not exact, but a certain particular pattern that she recognized in the way that they were eating. So she went back to school and got her PhD in addictive nutrition. She opened her own rehab center and she had a 97% recovery rate, which is unheard of. But it's because she implemented, the standard recovery practices along with nutrition. And then she wrote her book, Potatoes Not Prozac. She's written several other books, and she's literally helped hundreds of thousands of people with all types of addictions, and most significantly sugar addictions. So we're going to go through a little bit of her protocol. It's the protocol that I followed my second time around, and it's the protocol that worked for me and has worked for so many of my clients. It's worked for my children. It's what I stand by as the way of healing that brain chemistry.
Can I ask a question, Kelly?
Sure.
Because I'm special, I'm a panelist, I could ask them. So when I used to go to Al-Anon meetings, because I'm an adult child, I'm an alcoholic family, and I was absolutely shocked that it was nothing but donuts and cookies and coffee, and then people were outside smoking cigarettes. And I thought to myself, we're going from one addiction to another.
Yes.
I didn't have the knowledge base, but in reality, they're not really helping the situation.
No. No, and that's exactly what was happening then is still happening now. In fact, a lot of people will tell me when they leave a rehab center, they will instruct them to immediately get a bag of candy so that if they have a craving for alcohol or drugs or whatever else it is, they can have the candy instead. And so we're just swapping addictions, and we're really just swapping, what may be seemingly one more dangerous and socially unacceptable addiction for a less dangerous, more socially acceptable addiction in sugar. But we're not healing anything. We're not healing the brain chemistry. And we're not healing the depression or the anxiety either, right? So those people that are self-medicating with drugs or alcohol, they're now trying to self-medicate with sugar, which, sad to say, it's not going to medicate as well as those other things. So they're going to still be left with a lot of heavy-duty feelings if they have low serotonin. So you're absolutely right, Irma, unfortunately. So let's talk about what we can do, all right? And then you can be the messengers and get this word out there a little bit more, maybe. So the first step, all right, to healing the brain chemistry with food is to look at your protein. All right, and the reason that we want to look at protein is that if we identify serotonin as a brain chemical, as a neurotransmitter, and we know, which I'm going to tell you right now, that amino acids are what we need to generate those brain chemicals, then we look to protein because protein is where we get amino acids. Right? Amino acids are the building blocks for our muscles, but they're also the building blocks for those brain chemicals. So if we're not producing enough serotonin, we need to look at what comes before that. What do we need to generate more serotonin? And amino acids are the answer. Okay? There's some information on your slide there about what protein is if you're not sure. If you're vegetarian or vegan, you can still get protein. All right, you might have to work a little bit harder at it. You might have to make sure you're getting the right complement of amino acids. You're getting all the essential amino acids, but you can still get your protein. All right, and the key that we're going to talk about is the amount of protein and the timing of that protein. So you might think right now, well, gee, I just had a big piece of chicken for dinner, so I got protein. But there's an element to the timing of it and to getting the right amount at the right times that really impacts your serotonin. Okay? So getting protein to get those amino acids. The one that is most essential for serotonin is L-tryptophan. And that's an amino acid that converts into serotonin in the brain. Again, serotonin is what puts the brakes on our impulses. It improves our mood, reduces our cravings, and just tells us everything's good. All right, so we want to have optimized serotonin, right? We want to feel good. We want to have control over impulses. We don't want to feel powerless over cravings or have these cravings with us all the time. We want to just have that nice baseline of a strong, solid foundation. The second step is complex carbohydrates. All right, and the reason we need the complex carbohydrates is because L-tryptophan is the weakest of the amino acids. So I usually paint this picture, if you can try to imagine that the amino acids are sort of like football players, all right, and they're all trying to get across the blood-brain barrier. And that blood-brain barrier you might picture as a narrow corridor, a narrow hallway. And you've got all these big guys with shoulder pads and helmets trying to make their way, fight their way down this hallway. And they're bumping each other out of the way because they're so big. Well, L-tryptophan is the little runt. All right, you might think of him as the water boy for the team. And so he doesn't stand a chance getting down that hallway with all of those big guys trying to do the same thing. So when you have a carbohydrate, your body actually thinks you're going to be using your muscles, right? It doesn't recognize that you just felt like having a donut or a cookie. It thinks, oh, she's having carbohydrates, she must be getting ready to exercise or run, or something physical is going to happen. So your body will actually, if you have those carbohydrates, your body will instruct those big amino acids to go to the muscles, right? Because amino acids are the building blocks for the muscles too. So it'll pull them away from the brain. It will say, you guys head to the muscle. She's getting ready to run. And then the L-tryptophan can cross the blood-brain barrier easily. All right, and that allows that release of serotonin that creates, that feeling that all is well, and you have that control over impulses and everything else. Okay. The other thing with complex carbohydrates is that they create a longer lasting energy and more stable glucose than simple carbohydrates. All right, so complex carbohydrates, things like oats, brown rice, quinoa, veggies, rather than your white breads, your pastas, sugars and other simple carbohydrates, different, okay, and how the body processes them and how long the energy is that comes from those foods. All right, so that's step 2. So step 1 is protein, step 2 is complex carbohydrates, step 3 is 3 meals at consistent times. So this was probably the hardest one for me, because at the time that I implemented this program, I was managing a business. I was, in a very fast-paced environment, and sometimes lunch happened and sometimes lunch didn't happen. Sometimes lunch was at 3:30 in the afternoon, and sometimes lunch was not your optimal food choice at all. It was just something to quiet the belly. And what I didn't understand then was how important blood sugar levels are to the brain chemistry. All right, so this brain chemistry of being sugar sensitive is low serotonin, but we also tend to have volatile blood sugar. All right, and that's a telltale sign also. If you have a lot of ups and downs in your blood sugar, if you get shaky or dizzy, if you haven't eaten, those are some signals too that you may have that brain chemistry. But not eating at consistent times puts you at a real danger, a real risk, because your body doesn't know that you're just choosing not to eat, right? It doesn't know that you're just busy. It thinks that there's a shortage of food. It thinks that there's a famine and that's why you're not eating, right? So when you have those fluctuations in your blood sugar from not eating consistently, it sends off a fire alarm in the body, and that fire alarm releases cortisol, because cortisol is your stress response hormone. The problem with that is that cortisol blocks serotonin. So when you're under stress, your body doesn't want you to feel that everything's good, all is well, and you're satiated and happy. Your body wants you to run. It wants you to get out of Dodge. So cortisol will systematically block your serotonin from being released so that you are terrified and you do run, okay, and get away from whatever imaginary threat your body is perceiving. Okay, and this goes back, this is how we were created. And this is, the fight or flight mechanism, right? So if you were, running from a lion, this is what would be at play, right? That cortisol would spike, shut off serotonin. All of the amino acids would be sent to the muscles so that you could run. You could have what you need for the muscles to run, all right? And that's what happens when you skip meals. All right, your body doesn't know that you're just busy at work that day. It thinks there's a shortage of food. That creates a stress, that releases cortisol, and that blocks serotonin.
So Kelly, can I ask a question?
Sure.
The 3 meals a day at a consistent time is mind-boggling to me, that our nation, our culture has decided that we can just grab a meal or skip a meal or
Right.
sit on the run or multitask. And we've talked about this in our group as far as mindful chewing and eating and really being in a quiet meditative state, even if we're eating alone, lighting a candle, having our beautiful meal on a beautiful plate, and slowly bringing the food up and going through that whole process.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing is that the majority of us, if we listen to television, if we watch our coworkers, if we watch our friends, it's quite the contrary.
Right.
So it's fighting a system and not having to apologize for, oh, I'm always the last one to finish.
Mm-hmm.
Versus, you know what? I'm the last one to finish because I am chewing my food and digesting my food. It's all part of this relationship with the cortisol and with the serotonin and with what's
Right.
happening. So
Yeah, and it's a good point. And the other piece of it is something I've been talking about with people a lot just in the last few days. It's about daring to be different, right? It's about allowing yourself to do what works for your body and not apologizing for it, right? So if you need to take a break and eat your lunch, that needs to be important, right? More important than the tasks, and I'm not saying that people's work is not important. Certainly if you're saving lives or working in an emergency room, we'd have to figure something out there. But there are ways to take care of this, to take care of your body and not put yourself into a stress response pattern while still being effective at your job.
And it was called the lunch hour.
Yes.
The hour had a reputation for a specific reason. Now it's been carved down to a half an hour. It's actually a rule,
Right.
in businesses, that they have to allow employees to take lunch break.
Right.
It has been condensed from an hour to a half an hour. But a half an hour is good enough where you could sit getting away from
Mm-hmm.
it and going someplace to eat.
Right. If you're not doing other things, right? I mean, I know a lot of people that run their errands on their lunch break. So they don't eat their lunch, or they eat their lunch quickly so they can run out and do something. So yeah, it comes back to, I think, we have to take a stand for what's right for our bodies,
Mm-hmm.
and have that discipline around it,
Yeah.
set that pattern to do that. So balancing the blood sugar, having those 3 meals a day at consistent times balances the blood sugar. It calms down the cortisol, and it builds consistency of mindset. So that responsibility of being committed to the proper care of the body. All right, and that's a key. That's important, because if we're not taking responsibility for our own body, if we're not saying this is important, it's important for me to eat and to eat at regular times, then we're not being adults about our body, right? We're just ignoring what we really need to be doing for ourselves. So those are the 3 pieces. So I'm going to actually take a break for 1 second here because I've got a dog going crazy, and I'll be right back.
Okay. So here we are. Roberta, you're looking well.
Thank you.
Yes. Doreen, how's the weather in Florida?
Beautiful.
What's the temperature?
Oh, probably about 70 right now.
Wow, that's great.
I know.
Trudy, I'm going to unmute you for a second, Trudy. Well, I don't know if I can do this. Let's see. No, I can't.
Okay, and I'm back. Sorry about that, guys.
Okay.
Okay. We had somebody come to the door.
All right.
It's a great thing about doing webinars from home, right? All right, so how do we start doing the food? So this is the part, so we talked about protein, we talked about carbohydrates, we talked about 3 meals a day, all right? So those are your first 3 basic tenets, all right? The first 3 principles of how you're gonna start to correct and heal that brain chemistry. Now we're gonna get into a little bit more detail about how to do each step. Okay, so the first piece, and this relates to protein, is focusing on breakfast. All right, so make sure that you're getting adequate protein within the first hour of waking. All right, and this is usually where some of you are kind of sighing or feeling a little puzzled or maybe a little stressed because you have other things that you do in that first hour after waking, right? You have other priorities. Maybe you work out. Maybe you have an early morning that you have to get to the office really early, or maybe you have animals that you take care of. So when I talk to you about having protein within the first hour of waking, that can create stress. And then there are other of you that will say, well, that's no big deal. I can do that, no problem. All right, until you actually try it. So I'm not going to tell you that this is easy. It is doable. It is possible. But you're just going to need to really figure out how you're going to make sure you get adequate protein within that first hour of waking. So what's adequate protein? Well, I'm going to give you a little formula, and this formula is actually one that both Kathleen DeMason and Julia Ross agree on to some extent, and it's really based on body weight. So you can do this on pen and paper if you have any next to you, or you might even be able to just do it in your head. But you're going to take your body weight, what it is right now, you're going to divide that by 2, and that is how many grams of protein you need in a day. Okay, and then once you have that number, you're going to then divide it by 3, and that's going to tell you how many grams of protein you need at each meal. All right, now for lunch and dinner, it might not seem like a big deal, but some of you will be a little stunned when you look at what you're needing at breakfast time. All right, and that's definitely going to be the hardest, but that's why we focus first on breakfast, because most of us are not getting enough protein in the breakfast meal.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how do you get 22 grams of protein at breakfast?
So, well, the easiest way, I'm not going to say it's the right way or the best way. The easiest way is animal protein because it does have the highest level, right, of protein in it. So if you are somebody, if you're an omnivore, if you eat animal proteins, then anything that you would eat for dinner, you can eat for breakfast. All right, that's the easiest way. So for instance, a 4-ounce piece of chicken is about is about 25 grams of protein. All right, the same size of beef is around that same. Sometimes it's about 28. It might be more around 28 grams of protein. So animal proteins are pretty high, and it's an easy source. All right, you can also do a good quality protein powder if there's one that you're comfortable with. If you're vegan, vegetarian, there are lots of plant-based proteins. There's lots of things that you can do with, hemp protein and hemp hearts and all sorts of pea proteins. So there are lots of things that you can do to find and get that adequate amount of protein. But the biggest piece is just looking at breakfast differently, not looking at breakfast as that carb time of day, right, which in this country is pretty typical, right? Cereal or bagels or toast. That's pretty much the norm for us. If you look at other cultures, that's not the case, right? In other cultures, they don't really call it breakfast food. They just call it food because they would eat the same thing at dinner time. All right. And if we can get our heads around that a little bit more, it makes it much easier than, trying to find a way to make pancakes high in protein. So that's the first piece, is focusing on increasing that protein, getting the right amount in the first hour of waking. And then you do want to have that little bit of complex carb with it. All right. So a little bit, because that's again what's going to help L-tryptophan to reach the brain. All right. But we don't need to have, tons of carbohydrate in the morning. We just need enough, and that could even be in the form of fruit. That could be, for some people I know, they actually will make a smoothie and they'll put a little bit of oats in it, fruit in your smoothies, a little bit of oatmeal, a little bit of quinoa, a little bit of brown rice. Those are things that can actually provide enough carb to cause that changeover so that the L-tryptophan can reach where it needs to get to. All right, so that's number one. First, focus on breakfast and try to get that protein in the first hour. Okay, and again, you'll have challenges with this. Most of us do, but it's that process of working through it, of saying, okay, well, how can I adjust my workout routine? Or, if you're a runner, it's usually tough for runners because you don't want to have anything in your belly while you're running. So you have to do a little strategy, all right, to figure it out. If you're struggling, I have plenty of clients who are runners, and they were running so hard to lose weight, right, to stay in shape, to get fit, but their sugar cravings were sabotaging everything that they were doing with running. So when we rebalanced the brain chemistry, the running it took on a totally different meaning for them, right? Because now they weren't binging at night, they weren't overeating carbs at night, so they actually didn't have to run as much if they didn't want to, right? And they could actually look at the fact that their food and eating that protein in the morning was just as important, if not more important, than the running. All right, so keep that in mind. If you're running, or if you're working out, or if you're doing something just to keep ahead of what's happening with your sugar addiction, then this could be the answer. All right, and maybe your relationship with exercise will change a little bit too. Not that I'm suggesting you don't exercise. I do every day, and we all should. It's great for you, but it may just change a little bit of that, the urgency about when you do it or how much you do and so forth. Okay. So the next step. Did you have a question, Irma?
Well, I was just going to make one suggestion.
Sure.
One thing we've been doing is having oatmeal with chia seed and quinoa as one big breakfast cereal.
Yeah.
Add a fat, which is an almond butter or the almond butter,
Yeah.
and then a little bit of fruit.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been using the pomegranate seeds.
Okay.
But if I feel that that's not enough as far as the protein, then I'll have a little hamburger on the side.
Okay. There you go. Right. And we're all different, right? So again, look, if you base it on your body weight, that makes it a little easier to personalize it for you, to figure out the right amount for you. And yeah, beautiful. Good. So the next step, all right. So integrating this and drilling down a little bit more about how to make this work, that 3 meals a day with protein. All right, so we're going to first focus with breakfast, make that the priority to implement this. First, get breakfast down. Don't worry about the 3 meals a day until your breakfast is solid. All right, so, it might take a week or 2 or 3 weeks to be consistent about having that protein in the first hour with the carbohydrate. All right, you might have to work out some kinks. Don't try to do anything else until you get that first piece down. All right, then you graduate and you can go to the next step. All right, and that next step is working on 3 meals a day with protein. All right, so this is another place that I see a lot of challenges with folks, because if we're working on weight especially, then lunchtime is usually a salad, right? And I just had this conversation maybe 2 months ago with my sister. I sort of half wanted to strangle her because she should have known this by now, being related to me. But she was telling me she was having she was having these dizzy spells. And I said, all right, well, take me through your food. Take me through what you're eating. And she got to the point of lunch and she said, so at lunch, I have a green salad. And I said, okay, well, what's on it? She says, well, there's nothing really on it. It's just greens and tomatoes and cucumber. It's just a green salad. And I said, so there's no protein? And she said, well, no, I'm trying to lose weight. And of course, on the other end of the phone was my mouth dropping wide open, like, oh, it's completely opposite. But so 3 meals a day with protein at each meal, right? Because the protein is going to help keep our blood sugar balanced so we don't have that dip in our blood sugar and that cortisol release. The protein is going to give us the amino acids for our serotonin. So protein at each meal is a priority. All right, so breakfast first, get that down, and then move to upgrading all of your meals to make sure you're having protein. Okay, and create that schedule for eating so that you have your meals at consistent times. This will take practice, this will take effort, this will take discipline, but this gets easier and easier as you do it. All right, your body wants to have a system, it wants to have structure, it wants to know when you're feeding it. All right, and if you normally eat at 12 noon and one day something happens and you can't eat until 1, you know that there's gurgling, there's lots of stuff going on because your body is saying, hey, where's the food? We usually eat at 12, right? And that's a good thing, because when you have that regularity, what happens is when the body knows it's going to actually have food at 12 or 12:15, it starts getting ready before that. It starts preparing digestive enzymes so that when you actually eat food, your body's ready to break it down. It's ready to process that food, and your system works much more efficiently. Your digestion is much better. When you eat on the go, when you eat haphazardly and you just sort of grab something and stuff it in your mouth, your body's not ready for it. Your body wasn't expecting it. So there's no enzymes that have been secreted. There's nothing ready to actually process and anticipate that food. So it's a shock for your body, and it takes so much more energy to digest that food at that point. So there's so many pieces to why this is important, but 3 meals a day with protein, create a schedule. So figure out what works for you. It can be different for everybody, so you don't have to have breakfast at 7 and lunch at noon, and you don't have to do that. You can have what works for your schedule, but just try to keep it consistent and make sure there's not huge gaps, right, between your proteins. So if you're going 6 or more hours between your meals, then work on that a little bit. That's a long time to expect your body to go without protein. Okay, and again, making it a priority, making this important, recognizing that your body's needs are the first that should be on your list of priorities, because if you're not taking good care of yourself, if you're not well, if you're not in the place that you need to be in terms of your mood, in terms of your emotional well-being, then that's going to affect your work, that's going to affect your relationships, that's going to affect everything that you're trying to do well. All right? And then, simple meal planning. So I recommend, if you have problems with consistent meals because of preparation, then get some support on this around simple meal planning, maybe some batch cooking so that you can have foods already prepared and ready to go. Irma is completely, I'm sure, adept at all of this and supporting you in this, but keep it simple so that it's doable for you. All right? So just to sum up what we've covered, we talked about the fact that brain chemistry is actually the key to your relationship with sugar, and that it's not about willpower, right? So that if you've struggled with sugar in the past, with sugar addiction, carb addiction, I just want you to know that it's not because you're weak, it's not because you don't want it bad enough, it's nothing about you as a person that makes this something that you're not capable of, but it's your brain chemistry, potentially, if this is an issue for you, all right? And that brain chemistry can be healed. All right, so some of us are more susceptible to sugar addiction as a result of that brain chemistry. We may have been born with it, we may have inherited it. And if you have a family history of alcoholism, if you have parents that were addicted to sugar or carbs, that's often how it will represent. So, in my family, I got the sugar gene, right? I got addicted to sugar, not alcohol. All right. And it can be different for different family members, and it can be different as you move through the line in your family history. The good news is that we can support the brain chemistry and overall healing with food. And I'll say with some food practices, right? So it's not just the food, it's the timing of the food, it's the consistency of the food, it's the commitment to actually making this a priority. So I think, I shared a couple of resources. So I mentioned Kathleen DeMason, Potatoes Not Prozac. Radiant Recovery is her website. And again, she has several books. She's amazing. She's absolutely amazing. She's helped so many people, and she's got lots of resources on her site. The other that I referenced was Julia Ross, who wrote The Mood Cure, and you can visit her at moodcure.com. She also actually now is I don't know if she's an owner, but she helps facilitate at least a recovery center, I think, out in Arizona. So lots of similar concepts there. And then one of my favorite books is a book, Food and Behavior, by Barbara Stitt. So I brought in some things from each of these, and those might be things for you to look at if you're interested in learning more. And I think we're ready for questions.
So there is a question from Doreen in the chat, and she says, how
Okay.
does the change in biochemistry happen?
Okay. I'm sorry. Say it.
Is that still a question, or did you get that answer?
I'd love to hear Kelly's answer.
Could you Irma, you got a little quiet for me, so I don't know if it's on my end, but if you could repeat it, that would be great.
How does the change in biochemistry happen?
How does the change in biochemistry happen? Oh, perfect. Yeah. So what happens is, if you are sugar sensitive and you have, first of all, you have that predisposition to having lower serotonin, but the real key is that a sugar sensitive brain has more serotonin receptors. All right. So if you think of the way that I usually give, the analogy that I usually give is if you think of two cells, right? So let's pretend these are two cells and they're trying to communicate. All right. What happens is this cell, if it's the messenger cell, it's trying to send a message to this cell. This cell has receptor sites, right, that try to capture that message. All right. In the case of serotonin, if you have a sugar sensitive brain, you have extra receptors, right? You have lots and lots of receptors for serotonin. And so when you have sugar that fits into those receptors, causes a release of serotonin and you feel good. If you go cold turkey and stop having that sugar, you'll actually manufacture more receptors. All right, because the body's saying, oh my gosh, there's not enough coming at me. I've got to expand my reach so that anything that does come by, I make sure I don't miss it. All right, so if you go cold turkey, you get more receptors. That's more of a problem. That's why I don't recommend that. All right, because you get more receptors for serotonin. When you change your food and you start having more amino acids, more protein, what happens is you naturally fill those receptor sites, all right, with the protein, with the amino acids, with L-tryptophan. You get a natural release of serotonin. You feel good, all is well, your cravings subside, you have more control over impulses. And what happens over time is that without even trying to, without it being the primary objective, you start naturally having less and less sugar because you're getting the serotonin release that you need. All right. And then all of those other things that we do, having the 3 meals a day, balancing the blood sugar, all of those things begin to calm the system down to the point that you now don't need as many serotonin receptors because your brain's getting what it needs and it will actually let go of some of those receptors. All right. But what happens in someone who goes cold turkey, which I did, you go cold turkey, no sugar, your body you get more serotonin receptors, all right, because if any sugar comes in, it wants to grab it. It doesn't want to miss it. So you'll get more serotonin receptors. And then when you do, right, let's say you do a 3-week sugar detox and you have no sugar, and then the end of that 3 weeks, you go out and have ice cream or a brownie or whatever it is, you are going to get such a bigger high from that sugar intake that it's going to be much harder now to not continue having sugar. All right. And this isn't even a high that you're going to recognize, wow, I'm feeling so great. I never want to take sugar out again. It's not on a conscious level. It's on the level of these serotonin receptors. They're going to be screaming so much more the following day for that sugar. It's going to be much, much harder to avoid those cravings, to have that impulse control. All right.
Doreen,
So,
does that answer the question?
Yes.
It does. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're at the top of the hour, and I really like to honor everyone's hour and time. So if you have to drop off the phone, completely understand. But I wanted to see, Trudy, do you want to take yourself off mute and see if this was helpful for you? And I know Janice has a question, so we're going to address Janice's question.
okay.
I knew that, excuse me, I knew that sugar was complicated, but not this complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that the approach is complicated, though, or do you feel like you could implement it?
I think I can implement it. I think a major problem that we discussed, Irma, is my protein intake.
Right.
I need to up my protein majorly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you know what? It's a work in progress. So, for instance, if you're not someone that typically eats protein in the morning or even eats much of a breakfast in the morning, then take it slow, all right? You don't have to immediately go to 20 or 25 grams of protein. You can start building on that because some people, I have a lot of clients that hadn't eaten breakfast for years, right? So they were in that habit of just not having breakfast and they felt good not having breakfast. So just eating at all in the morning was tough. So just start with a little bit, get the body used to digesting at that time, and it'll get easier and easier as you do that.
Yep, I'm definitely going to work on this. I can do it.
Good. Excellent.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Very informative.
Trudy.
Thank you, Irma.
You're welcome, Trudy. Janice, well, before we go to Janice, Maria, are you here? Can you take yourself off mute?
And I can do that if we need to. Is anybody? Maria, here we go. and Janice.
And Janice.
And then we also have Peg and Vicky that
Yes.
I'll promote everyone now.
Okay.
So if you don't want to be shown, if you don't want us to see your lovely face, you can just click on your stop video option. And then if you don't want to be heard, you can unmute yourself. Janice is, there we go, unmuted. So Janice, I just unmuted your line.
Yes, thank you.
There we go.
I have a just quick question regarding, I wrote in a question about having done a hypnosis in the
Yes.
past.
Yeah.
And I have to say, after your presentation, that you explained in a very high level way that I think I understand why I've still felt really bad. I'm not feeding myself regularly. I'm certainly not doing it with probably more of a balance.
Okay.
So it just meant I felt bad all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
it's not that the sugar didn't take care of the craving, but it doesn't change the behavior that has to happen, feed myself.
Right. Exactly. And you know, there are, so hypnosis, there's a whole category of things that can actually be supportive, that can really help in this process. Meditation, even EFT, if anyone does EFT or tapping.
Yes.
So EFT actually can change things in the neocortex, right? So they've proven that it can change the way we think. So it can change if you're having thoughts, if those, if your connections to food are really strong. So if you have sort of that, you know, that comfort connection with certain foods and sugars, that can be helpful there. Meditation, any form of meditation can work on several levels. So first, it calms your cortisol. And I just did a meditation session with a client today over the phone, and she literally told me she almost felt like she had the runner's high in her brain. And part of that was her cortisol calming down, but part of it was actually beta endorphins. So when you meditate, it actually raises your beta endorphins. So those two things, the cortisol and the beta endorphins, are weaknesses for people with that sugar sensitive brain. All right, they do have lower beta endorphins, they do have volatile blood sugar, and that cortisol imbalance. So meditation can be a super helpful thing to do as you work through your food process. It can be really, really supportive.
Okay, then I just have one other question.
Sure.
I have 2 alcoholic grandfathers, and I had a mother who had a weight problem. Dad did not so much. Can you talk about generational problems with all of this?
Yeah, so right off the bat, the brain chemistry is passed down in the genes, so it can be inherited. So you may not, if they're alcoholic, right, then they have those extra serotonin receptors in the brain. They have that brain configuration, and that can be passed down. So it's a common scenario. What you're saying is not at all a surprise to me. That is more so the case than not, where children of alcoholics, grandchildren of alcoholics, either have a problem with alcohol or they have a problem with sugar. And really, it's the same thing, right? So alcohol really is doing the same thing in the brain that sugar does. It's really just turning into sugar and affecting the serotonin that way.
Okay, well, thank you for that validation, and for all your presentation, and very clear, as well as the text you put up online.
Oh, well, you're welcome. Thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing.
You bet.
Thank you, Janice. And Kathy, did you have anything? You can take yourself off mute if you had a question or a comment.
No, it was very, very informative. Thank you.
And was there a takeaway for you, Kathy?
Oh yeah, it's more protein.
Yeah.
Usually in the morning, I was just going to go do a Google search on a tablespoon of peanut butter. Does anybody know offhand how much?
Yeah, not enough.
Yeah.
So that's I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's one of the misconceptions a lot of people have is they'll say, well, I have a piece of toast with peanut butter. It's usually not going to be enough, all right? You can, do your calculation based on your weight. You can check out a tablespoon. I don't remember. It's not a whole lot. You have to eat almost, I think, a half a cup
Oh, boy.
to get what most of us are needing in the morning. So if that works for you, I guess. But you could also do other things, right? So you could use nut butters with, like Irma said, with, with chia seeds, with, other sources of plant proteins if you want to do that. You just have to be a little bit more creative about it, right? You have to have a little bit more discipline about putting those things together well. So.
Is anybody on the call vegetarian other than Doreen? I think you're vegetarian currently. Are you? I forget. No.
No, I decided to add the meat to make it easier with the protein.
Right. Okay. And is anybody a vegetarian? Vicky? Yes, I know for sure, Vicky.
Well, I had tried before, but it was the protein. I was having headaches, and I figured out that when I ate more protein, I was having fewer headaches.
Yeah, it is.
But I still need more protein, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you, if you just do that first part, so if you want to test this, just do that first piece of getting enough protein in the first hour. Just commit to doing it for 2 weeks. And I'm going to promise you'll see a difference. And you'll see a difference in your cravings, your mood. You'll also maybe see a difference in your sleep. So if any of you are having challenges with sleep, your serotonin is directly related to your melatonin. So if you don't have good levels of serotonin, you're probably not producing good levels of melatonin. So that's another benefit. And usually within 2 weeks of doing it, you'll start to see those changes, and it's exciting, it's encouraging, because you actually start to feel like, wow, I'm not pulled, in that direction for the sugar or the carbs. It's not, again, it's not a fight of willpower anymore. It just becomes a natural lack of desire, lack of need. Not to say that you won't ever want to have dessert again or have something sweet, but there's a very different feeling about it when the brain chemistry starts to balance out. And it can start as early as 2 weeks. You can start getting a taste of that. No pun intended.
So I think Roberta has a question.
Okay.
I wrote in about eating that protein right upon awakening within the hour. What happens physiology if you don't have it and you have it another hour later?
Great question. So your blood sugar is most volatile, most at risk first thing in the morning, and your serotonin tends to be the lowest. So that's why that first hour is the most important. Because if you start your day with low blood sugar and low serotonin, you'll have much more intense cravings if you're sugar sensitive. So it's going to be much harder to not have the donuts, not pull into Dunkin' Donuts on your way to work, because you haven't had that protein to stabilize things. So great question.
Thank you.
And the one other thing that I wanted to mention is that Kelly just took, Vicky and myself were part of it, 50 people through a detox. And I really never thought that I could kick the sugar thing. And I've been listening to Kelly during the training for the detox about somebody's doing something in the background. If they're just having some activities, if they could just mute themselves, that would be great. So I was surprised that the whole aspect of eating protein changed so much about myself that I found that I actually needed less sleep. So I was getting up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and thinking, oh, maybe I'll email some people and do events, which is just sort of crazy making, because I really love 8. I would take 9 hours of sleep a night, but I was actually needing less sleep, and also I wasn't dipping at 2.
Right.
2 o'clock dip, 2 to 3 o'clock energy dip, where that's when I was living in New York City. That's when you saw the lines at Starbucks go all the way around the block because everybody was having a sugar caffeine dip. That didn't happen while I was going through the cleanse. So what I took away from the cleanse is to eat protein at every meal. So it really has impacted so much about me as far as my energy and my thinking.
Yay.
Yeah. So Maria, how are you? I think Maria maybe put us on mute.
No.
No? Maria, are you there? But I don't think that she can talk. I think she's talking, but we're not hearing her.
Well, I can mute her and then unmute her again.
Are you there, Maria? I see her mouth is moving, but we're not hearing her. So I don't know what
So there's just one Maria, right?
there's just one Maria.
Yeah, I have, maybe on her, whatever she's speaking into on her device might not be working because we do have her line open.
Okay. Oh, she's still talking. Oh, so sorry. Oh,
Let me
I'm
see.
so sorry that we can't hear you. You can write it in the chat box.
Yeah.
That I don't know if you do. Oh, wait, here's something else from Roberta.
Oh, I just asked it.
Okay, great. Okay. So let's see if Maria has something to write in, or otherwise. Kelly, did you record this?
I did.
Oh, beautiful.
I did, yeah.
Okay. All right, so I don't see Maria posting a question.
It looks like she's playing with her settings a little bit
Okay.
because her video's going on and off, but
Yeah. And Peg, how about you, Peg? I know you might have some background noise. You want to take yourself off mute? Is there anything that you want to share? So Peg might not be available to do that.
There, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
yes.
You can. Welcome.
I can hear me. Thank you. I wanted to, sorry about the background noise.
It's okay. We'll work through that.
Okay. I was wondering if you have that math again in figuring out how much protein
Sure.
I'm going to need, please.
Absolutely. So you take your body weight
Mhm.
and you divide that in half,
Mhm.
and then you take that number
Mhm.
and divide it by 3, assuming you're eating 3 meals a day. So that will tell you then how many grams of protein you need at each meal.
Great.
So for instance, if you have someone that weighs 120 pounds, 60 would be the number of grams they need in a day, and then 20 at each meal.
Perfect. I'm going to try this.
Good. Yay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So Maria's still trying. She's trying so hard.
Do we want to type it? Does she want to type it? There is a little Q&A box right on your screen. It says Q&A, and you can type questions in there also.
Let's see if there's anybody. No, nobody's in there. Okay, Maria. Oh, Maria. So I'm so sorry, Maria, that we can't hear you, but it's nice to see you. Trudy, it's lovely to see you in person. I'm seeing you in the upper corner, so it's just nice to see everybody's faces. So, okay, we're going to say
Irma,
goodbye
thank
for
you.
now.
Good night, everyone.
So,
Thank you so much.
You're
Yeah,
welcome. My pleasure. My pleasure.
really,
Pass-
really great.
pass
Thank
it
you,
on.
Kay. Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.